Hello, I'm Michael Shawn, and welcome to Roger Dykes Just Sayin. Roger Dykes is a teacher and counselor with a master's degree in family counseling from Texas Tech University. He is the owner of UV Blake Records and has written a book titled Non-Persons Rolling in a Normal World. And there's a few more things. Roger was born with cerebral palsy. Now a quadriplegic, he has been confined most of his life to a wheelchair. And for a while, even enjoying a career as a stand-up or sit-down comedian and after-dinner speaker. Disabled? Yes, but you forget about that pretty quickly because Roger thrives. So here is Roger Dykes.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. I hope that you've had a great week. I'm able to get Michael to join us. Michael, Sean, it's so good to have you back.
I am so glad to be here. Man.
Seems like a long time, doesn't it?
Roger, you know, I am noticing for our listeners, even though this is an audio podcast, of course, but on this Zoom technology that we're using, I can see Roger on the screen in front of me. And folks, let me tell you, he is dressed up for this podcast. I'm talking about a white shirt with an ironed collar. His hair is in meticulous condition. Perfect. Every hair, both of them are aligned on the top of his head. And Roger, you're looking great.
Well, I always look forward to being with you, Michael. It causes my hair to stand on end.
Well, enough of that. Roger, we have talked about a few things on the first couple of your Roger Dykes Just Saying podcast because they were more of just an effort to introduce Roger Dykes to the folks that may not have had the pleasure of knowing you for a while. But we are where we are here, and we want to get off into some areas now that really are the purpose of this podcast. Before we go there, a lot of people see you and they say, well, this is Roger Dykes. This is who he is. He's got a master's degree in family counseling at Texas Tech University. He's written a book. He has got all this counseling stuff going on and a lot of interaction, Bible study groups that he teaches at his church locally here in West Texas. And Roger is doing all these things, but few people maybe think about you growing up as a child. Your cerebral palsy is something you were born with as a disability. And I understand every toy you had even had to be customized for use. But tell us a little bit about growing up with cerebral palsy as a child. What was that like?
Well, one of the things I always used to tell people when I made my presentations was that I got a lot of fresh air as a child because my dad kept leaving me on other people's doorsteps. They would bring me back, however, so it never really accomplished anything.
Oh, Roger.
But seriously, growing up disabled does make a difference. My parents were very kind to me. My mother said that from my birth, I was talking, which is unusual for a cerebral palsy person to be even able to talk. But I was talking with adult sentences far before I should have been able to do that. And as a result, I was given many times the responsibility of answering people's questions about my condition. Back when we're talking now in the early 50s, I realize I'm giving away my age, but nonetheless, in the early 50s, there was a lot less political correctness around people.
Absolutely, yeah.
And as a result, we would be in stores and people would come up to mom and dad and ask what's wrong with him. And instead of mom and dad answering their question, I would answer their question. that generally caught them off guard because they never expected me to be able to talk, much less communicate at that level. I'm told, I was quite young at the time, so I don't know, I wasn't aware of this, of course, but I'm told that as a baby or as a small child, I was unable to hold up my head. But Mom and Dad would actually hold my head and I would still answer questions. This was their way of getting me adjusted to being disabled.
You know, your dad, and I actually had the pleasure of meeting your dad and your mom on a couple of different occasions. And he was a great guy, Roger, and you could tell they were all about your best interest. That was a special time in your life.
Well, now you must understand too that in the early 50s, not much was known, particularly in this part of the country, about this condition that I had. So therefore, they were stumbling along with me, as it were, trying to figure out how to deal with a child that was disabled. And there have been many situations along the way, which we'll talk about in future podcasts, of situations where they were facing additional challenges beyond what parents of normal children face. They had those kind of issues too, but there were other issues as well. So I am very thankful for my parents. I'm also extremely thankful for my grandparents. Hopefully in future podcasts, we'll be giving you a few anecdotal statements and stories about their influence on my life. All these people were very, very influential.
Well, they certainly were. And you're right. We will get into that because it ties in directly to some things that we're going to be bringing up before too long here. We talked to you about having related some of your humorous moments from your life, the fact that you have worked professionally as a comedian, how you have actually used humor over the years to help you deal with your disability. Has it always gained you a positive response when you did that?
Most of the time, yes. Occasionally, no. I've had detractors along the way who did not appreciate the kind of humor I did, particularly making fun of my disability. But I viewed it as a way of communicating ideas across to people in such a way that they would be more receptive to it.
Now, give me just a second, Roger. Let me give folks, excuse me for interrupting you, but let me give folks an example of exactly what we're talking about here. On another podcast, I got a chance to interview Roger Dykes. And off the cuff said something about, Roger, you're in rare form today. You act like you really feel well, to which you just snap on a dime and say, well, I'm crippled. And I mean, it was hilariously funny when you said that. However, if I had said that, I would have been taken out and shot. That is a type of humor that you seem to just have a perfect grasp of. And it's funny whenever I get around you and you're doing that.
Well, this is one of the reasons that I have managed to get people to appreciate my situation, because I want people to be so relaxed around me.
But Roger, actually, you took it to the next level. You professionally worked as America's #1 sit-down comedian, and I remember that billing, an after-dinner speaker, and you really, as I say, took it to the next level.
Well, we wanted people to feel good around. I want people to feel good around me. And one of the things that bothers me is when people are fearful that they're going to say the wrong thing, offend me, and therefore they feel like they're walking on eggshells. And I found that when I call myself, and I do it in the book, I do it publicly, I refer to myself as a cripple. People in the handicap world are sometimes turned off by that. I'm not doing it to offend anyone. I'm doing it to say, you can't say anything to me that's going to offend me as far as discussing the disability. Therefore, you can relax and not sit around worried that you're going to say the wrong thing and offend Roger. You won't do it. People who've used material in the past to try to offend me, if they will, or make fun of me, I've usually taken that material, turned it into jokes, and made money off of it. So keep it up. I appreciate any you want to give me is appreciated.
Roger, when you were in graduate school, you had an interesting experience with a class training exercise to do group therapy. Can you tell us what happened there?
Yes, this was a class. Of course, the class was about teaching us how to run a group therapy session. And so we were in a group in order to learn that. And the first night we were there, it was always typical of psychology graduate classes that you give a little bit of information about yourself. So we sat in the circle and we went around the circle giving them various information. Well, I was about halfway in the circle, and they got to me, and I told them that, I was planning to be a comedian, and that I was just getting my degree as a fallback to the idea of working in clubs. They asked me how I plan to put the two together, and I explained that I plan to counsel by day and entertain by night in Las Vegas, and the advantage I would have would be when the little lady came in and said, I think my husband's cheating on me with a brunette, I could say, no, it's actually a blonde because I saw him in the club last night. But anyway, the idea, when we finished this session, the very first session, the person that was running the class came up to me after it was over and said, I want to tell you that I did not appreciate what you said at all.
Oh,
and
my.
I said, okay, what is it you didn't appreciate? And she said, I didn't like your humor. I didn't like you making fun of the disabled that way. And I said, okay. But remember, in these kind of classes, you're told you can say anything you want to and you won't be criticized.
And this was let's clear this now. This was for lack of a better term, normal person.
Oh, yeah. Everyone in the room but me was, for lack of a better term, normal.
Yeah,
so
right.
Anyway, she was quite upset. Turns out her son, of course, I didn't know this, but her son was disabled, and she didn't think that was funny at all. So I didn't apologize. I just went on because you don't apologize for telling the truth in group. So when the class ended, now I'm not talking about that night, but when the class ended at the end of the semester, she came up to me and she said, I owe you an apology. And I said, why? And she said, because I actually forgot that you were in a wheelchair by the time the semester was over. And she said, it worked exactly like you said it would. And I said, yes, ma'am. That's my whole point. I want people to acknowledge that I'm in a wheelchair, acknowledge that I'm disabled, but I want them to forget that it makes that much difference.
You're still that way today after all these years, Roger. I can speak as someone who spends an inordinate amount of time around you because you and I have several projects that we work on. I find myself doing the same thing. I'll admit it. I find myself losing sight of the fact that you are dealing with some remarkable disabilities, yet I mean, you're just Roger, and we talk and we interact, and I quit making allowances for the fact that you are disabled to the point that you are, because anyone will do that spends any time around you, because you've brought your head, your brain, your consciousness up and out of that place. Would that be fair to say?
That's what I'm hoping to do, and I want people to react the way you're talking. I want them to forget, because that way they're free to say anything they want to. They know they're not going to offend me. I get honest responses. I don't get guarded responses for fear of, well, what's he going to think if I say this?
Well, anybody is going to give you guarded responses, Roger, when they first meet you. And when you first interact with someone, it's always going to be guarded responses because you're in a wheelchair.
Exactly. And I know that. And when I did my after dinner speaking and when I would entertain, we would be probably 10 or 15 minutes into the routine before the audience was willing to laugh at the jokes I was telling about the wheelchair, because they have been trained not to do that. And so for me to come along and make fun of something that is at the time pretty much a sacred cow that you didn't make fun of.
What we're talking about here is you on stage. You were in the center ring. You were the center of attention. But let's put you back into the arena of just being with regular people in a large venue. Why do you think disabled people are overlooked, in fact, ignored in places like public arenas? Tie that in.
Well, I believe sincerely that it was in large part because as children, they were trained that way. Let me give you an example. I was in a restaurant one time, actually it was a cafeteria, and I was being rolled down the side, and it so happened that you could see the patrons who were eating at the tables, and they could see you. And there was a child sitting close to the edge, and when I came by, of course, the child turned around, looked at me, and pointed and said something to his mother, to which the mother reached over and, as it were, jerked the child around, dislocating most of the bones in his little body, and put him straight. That you don't do that. That's a disabled person. You don't do that. All right. If you train children that they can't look, they can't point, and they can't ask, the logical result of that would be they'll ignore you. So I think we have trained generations before me and my generation and some after me to ignore disabled people because there's nothing good you can do with them. And I've had children come up to me. Of course, I'm in a wheelchair. They're fascinated by that. They want to touch it. And I don't want them shoving me down the hall. But of course, they can feel it. They can touch it. It's okay. Get used to it. Get acquainted with it. I've had them say, "Why can't you walk?" Now, when they ask that question, they're not wanting the medical opinion, nor are they wanting the description of the disability. What I tell them is, this is the way God made me. And they accept that and they move on. That satisfies their curiosity.
Kids are great.
And that's the reason I want to talk to children. I do not want them sheltered from me. I want to talk to them, because if you talk to them, they in turn learn what to do and what to say, and that we're not something to be feared, ignored, or avoided.
Now, that's dealing with kids, but dealing with adults, and in a way you've answered this question already, but adults then take it to the next level, almost to the next extreme. They are almost to the point of, and dare I say it, Roger, uncomfortable, unless they know you, uncomfortable with you being around, because here's a disabled person that we need to make sure that not only do we not upset this person by saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, but we need to be careful around this person. Let's don't trip over this person. Let's make sure that this person is comfortable, but not at the expense of us being able to stand up and cheer and move around and so on and so forth. Roger, do you feel what I'm talking about here? Or do you feel these issues taking place anytime you're out in a public place.
As soon as they learn about me, as soon as they talk to me, or as soon as I can speak to them, obviously we can take a lot of the barriers out of the way. Now, there will always be barriers there because they do not know what to say to me, and I don't always have an opportunity to respond to them, educate them, if you will. But as a general rule, I'm wanting them to get to know me, or to see that I order meals, I do things like normal people do to that extent. One of the things that we bring out in the book is the fact that I cannot deny, nor would I try to deny, that I'm in a wheelchair. No matter to what extent I go, I will never, ever be normal. I'm not going to do things the way you do them.
This is me. What you see is what you get.
That's what I want to be, because there's no point in denying the fact or trying to play like I'm not disabled. I'm not going to do things in the way you do them. Doesn't mean I won't get them done. I will get them done, but probably in a different fashion than the way you would do it. I get it done because I understand where I am limited. I'm to some degree, that knowledge. But at the same time, I maximize the knowledge of the limitation. I'm also working to work around it, come up with other ways of getting the same job done.
Roger, there are so many issues that we could start out with here, the issues of caregivers. And we want to be clear with folks that Roger Dykes cannot do so many of the simple things that some of us normal people will take for granted, like, for instance, going to bed, or getting up in the morning, or going to the restroom facility, or getting something to eat, preparing something to eat. That and about a jillion other things Roger simply cannot do without assistance. He is a paraplegic, and he doesn't have the use of his limbs. He has the use of his mind. Very unusual. We pointed this out on the last podcast. It's very unusual that someone with cerebral palsy can speak as clearly and communicate as clearly as Roger does. And that's, in that respect, we know he is very unique. He is highly intelligent and has a lot to say. Roger, let's talk about caregivers. And I realize that you are at this time dependent on several of them, and who knows, they may listen to this podcast. But even though you and I are by ourselves right now here accomplishing this, but Roger, where do you start when I ask you, what are the challenges in working with caregivers in your home that are not family?
Well, obviously, because they're not family, there is a sense that they're here, they like me. I'm not denying that at all. But at the same time, as I pointed out in other situations, people who are around me like that are here because there is a paycheck. And if there was no paycheck, they wouldn't just drop over for no reason. The reason they drop over is for the paycheck. That in no way means that they don't like me or they wouldn't enjoy being around me and all that. And we do have a good relationship. Someone, for example, doesn't come in, I may, and it's happened for various reasons, I may actually miss a meal. Well, that's not a big deal. The problem, though, gets to be when at night, when they put me to bed, when I'm put in bed using a lift and all that, they don't have to do any lifting at all. But when I'm put in bed, I am in bed and cannot do anything else but be in bed. I'm totally vulnerable when I am in bed. Therefore, I have a rule. It's really the only rule that is absolute around here. And that is, I am never to be left in bed without someone in the house.
And that's for lots of reasons.
Mainly safety, because if there is, were there to be a fire, were there to be a break-in, whatever, I would not be able to do anything about it. I can now, because of some new equipment I've just received, make phone calls out. So I could get 911, for example. But if the fire started close to my bedroom, it'd be a challenge whether they would get here or I would become a crispy critter.
Roger, there is, I'm going to tell you, you're just scratching the surface here. I know that there are some sticky situations that have occurred. It was just the other day when you and I were talking, you offhandedly said, yeah, I was up all night because you simply did not have anyone to help you get to bed. And the purpose, again, of this conversation is not saying, oh, poor Roger. But the point is there are some holes, there are some fallacies in the way that the assistance that you get that you are very appreciative of. We're not dunning the system, but people like you do have some assistance from the state of Texas, which you appreciate. But at the same time, there is a way that some of that is controlled, the oversight on that, which may look good to the voters, but to people who don't, until they really listen to you, understand a situation that can not only can occur, but does occur, and you are left to live through it and survive even with risk to your own self and life. It gets a whole lot deeper and a whole lot darker than what we're just talking about right here. As a matter of fact, Roger, we should get you to tell us the story that you shared on another podcast sometime back that is just this remarkable story that was happening right here in your hometown that a lot of people didn't know. If they had have known, I am certain that there would have been people digging a path to your door during that blizzard because there was a really crummy situation that existed. But the fact that it can exist and probably will again when that sort of thing happens is something that we as a people, we as Texans ought to be concerned that there is a hole, a gap this size in the system. And it's not necessarily always, folks, Roger needs more money. That's not what we're talking about here, particularly in the beginning. We're talking about the way things, the instructions that are tied to things, the way things have to happen. And sometimes it's just ridiculous. Let me point out one case. You need someone there in the evenings with you when you are put to bed until you get up the next morning. We just discussed that. You have also arranged for them to, they don't get paid to snooze on the couch or there's a bedroom for them and that sort of thing. But in fact, they have duties. Your housekeeping chores are done, cooking, and all of the things that you do to keep a home in order. So much of that stuff is assigned to the people that work there all night. So it's just like shift work. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's fair. And let me explain from the state of Texas viewpoint, because this is very important. The state of Texas sees public assistance in the understanding that families should be responsible for taking care of family. So they assume.
And nobody's going to argue with that, Roger.
I'm totally in favor of that. But what they've never understood is there are individuals like myself who have no family. As a result, all of my work, everything around here that gets done for me and my benefit is done, paid for by these caregivers with no major volunteer help coming in to do it and no family to pick up the slack. They assume that if you get sick, for example, your family will be there to take care of you. You can even dispense with the caregivers until you feel better, for example. Well, in my case, that's not true. I need the caregivers here at their regular hours to take care of me. One of the reasons that we do it in shift work is because If you're working at night, I can pay you for the work you do, the task you accomplish. However, if you are sleeping here at night, I cannot pay you because the state of Texas would not want to pay parents, for example, to sleep while their child or disabled child in the next room is sleeping. That I understand, but what the state doesn't understand is when you don't have parents, there's no one to stay here at night unless they're paid or unless they volunteer.
Everyone has just heard what you said. And that's the truth, what you just said. That's the way it is. And there are a lot of tax-paying citizens go, well, that sounds all right to me. I don't want to pay people to come to Roger's house and take a nap. As long as they're busy and as long as they're working to Roger's benefit, then the state's money is being spent properly. But where does the problem come, Roger? Where's the hole in this?
Many of them have other jobs. In fact, they all have, with the exception of one, a full-time job in addition to this. So when they come here, to expect them to stay up all night working after they've already worked 8 hours on their other job is very, very unrealistic. But I still have to have someone here, and there's no other choice I've got. So, as a result, we have to work with a partial volunteer system. They get paid, but they also give me a few hours that they're not being paid for, and that's the hours that they can theoretically sleep in.
Now, when you're talking about people who are not family members, and maybe prior to the job interview, when you initially met this person, they're not family. Why would they want to do that, Roger?
Well, that's actually my difficulty. Most people don't want to do this. And one of the problems we have right now is they have a set amount of money that I'm allowed to pay them, pay caregivers. There is a top value. It is very low. I will tell you, it's above minimum wage, of course, but it's not very far above minimum wage.
Right.
And so as a result, they can be paid more for doing less in the commercial world. Caregivers in the commercial world are paid more, have less responsibility. And why would they want to come over here for less money and more responsibility?
All right.
As a result, it makes it very difficult to find people.
Well, okay. Now, we brought several things into the light right here, and there's no reason why this podcast, Roger Dykes Just Sayin, should necessarily be a whine session, because that's what a lot of people are going to say. Roger, you're just whining. You know, I mean, you got a nice home, your roof doesn't leak, your lights are turned on, and you've got some help coming in, and the state of Texas has proved that we care about you because of all of this. Well, here's what we need to do, Roger. In my opinion, we need to tell the folks right now that on this podcast, there is not enough time left for us to tell one true story, one incident. It lasted 2 or 3 days, but that you lived through not too long ago, that shows how a system that is set up the way this system is can completely fall apart. And you are, if not at least required to go through a harrowing experience of being tremendously uncomfortable and suffering is the word, and to the fact that maybe even your life could have been at risk. There just 1 or 2 more things would have had to happen at that point. Gee whiz, Roger, it could have gone very badly very quickly. Show how this real life experience that you lived through really shines a light on what is wrong with the way things are set up right now. Because you are not the only disabled person, severely disabled person, that is out there right now that is in your situation. You have lived to a certain age and you don't have family. You have acquaintances and good friends all over the place, but you don't have family. When it hits the fan, so to speak, that's who you look to. That's who you count on. And what does Roger Dykes do?
Oh, I'm with you all the way, and I know the story you're talking about, and I'll be happy to share it with you on the next podcast.
It took place among us here in Roger's hometown, and none of us knew it was happening because Roger was in the situation that he was in, and Roger was left helpless to do anything about it. We'll explain all that on the next edition of Roger Dykes Just Saying. Roger, I think it would be important to point out that your podcast is going to renew every 3 weeks with a brand new episode. And if they will subscribe to your podcast, then they'll get a simple heads up when the new podcast is there. Another thing, Roger has Roger Dykes Just Sayin Facebook page, and that's ROGERDYKES. And you can go and kind of keep up with things that are going on there, too. Also, let's go ahead and mention this, too. Roger, your book, which is a fun read. Roger, do you hear the dog in the background barking?
Yeah, I do.
That's the one. That's the famous dog. I don't know if I should bring it, but now the dog is on another media.
Right.
Yes, you see that dog.
Well, and it started barking. Yeah, it started barking favorably when you mentioned the book, which I assume means the dog has probably listened to the book by now.
Non-Persons Rolling in a Normal World, and that's available in audio form on Amazon. Roger, brother, it is always good to visit with you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's no doubt.
Roger Dykes Just Sayin. Thanks, Roger. You've been listening to Roger Dykes Just Sayin. If you'd like to get a message to Roger, his Facebook account is listed as Roger Dykes. Become a friend, or you can send your questions and comments to rogerdykes51@gmail.com. That's ROGERDYKES51@gmail.com. Our podcast reveals a new episode every 3 weeks. Rollout is on Wednesday evening, shortly after dark, Texas time. Join us next time for our next episode of Roger Dykes Just Sayin. I'm Michael Shawn. On behalf of Roger Dykes, thanks for listening.